Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. All right, here we go. John Middlekauff. What a circus that was for Dallas. And you know, John, we've talked about this for years and years. I've never bought into Dallas. I always had this rule, the pretty good rule. Romo, Dak, they'd be pretty good. And then there was about a 5-week stretch this year that I bought into it. And then they went to Miami. And I'm like, okay, it's the same old shit. And then I said on the air, I was reeled in. I got fooled. But if you look in retrospect now, blown out by the Niners, blown out by Buffalo, pounded by Green Bay in the playoffs, lost to Miami, and beat Detroit on, a really dubious officiating moment. And in that game, Dak had 2 picks and 10 completions. And so you look at it, and my takeaway is this was just an average team, right? Like a slightly better than average team.
Well, to me, I'm with you. I bought into them. Their downfall now, 3 straight years, is the quarterback who makes a ton of money this year, an all-pro. Interceptions. 3 years ago against the Niners at home, threw an awful pick and was not good in that game. Last year against the Niners in the playoffs, 2 interceptions. Today, how many could he have thrown? 5? I mean, There were some drops. Obviously, the pick 6, which the guy walked into the end zone, was not some freaky play. And then the other thing the Cowboys kind of hung their hat on was physicality, being a tough defense. What the hell was that? So if I tell you the Cowboys defense gonna no-show, and Dak Prescott, I don't care what the final numbers look like. The game was over in the first half when he's throwing the ball to the other team and getting thoroughly outplayed by a first-year starter. Just a horrendous effort by the defense of Dak Prescott.
Yeah, I mean, when you size up a player and Jordan Love and Dak on the same field, Jordan Love's more talented. He moves better. He's got more of a whip. He made a sidearm throw late in the game into the end zone to Romeo Doubs. Dak can't do that. That's just beyond Dak. That was a Mahomes-level throw, a Lamar Jackson throw. It reminded me of Lamar. And I'm like, Dak can't do that. Dak doesn't put a ton of velocity on the ball. He really has to step into it. He was never a natural thrower. I mean, I joked out of college. I thought he was a better version of Tebow. He had all the intangibles, but he wasn't a beautiful thrower. And when I've used Kirk Cousins as a comp, he's Kirk Cousins with the Jordan brand, is that Kirk's a more accurate thrower. Dak's a better athlete. But we always feel with Kirk, he's holding you back from a Super Bowl. But we somehow feel that Dak is carrying you to one. And I watched today and I'm like, he's easily the second best quarterback on the field. It's not particularly close.
Well, the reason guys like Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Kirk Cousins have to be so elite with their footwork because they can't afford to throw off their back foot. The one reason why Aaron Rodgers always pushed back on some of that, like, let me freelance. He'd get away with it. Brett Favre, the big arm guys, right? You see it with Mahomes and Josh Allen. They're not beholden to the quarterback feet, quote unquote rules that the coaches harp on because of their talent. And you saw today, Jordan Love had countless throws off his back foot that hit guys in stride way down the field. Dak Prescott, if the timing's a little off, he's way off. And today, I mean, he was terrible, Colin. I mean, this is 3 straight years of just absolute no-shows in these playoff games. And I know, and the one playoff game he had that was good was against Tampa Bay, who was clearly god-awful and was, headed home, should not have made the playoffs last year. So against the Packers, whose defense has been really bad. I mean, the number one conversation is like Matt LaFleur's got to fire his buddy Joe Barry. And then for them, I know they got the touchdown late in the game, but to only have, and I mean, they had 7. How does this happen? I don't understand. Obviously, Mike's the offensive play caller. It's a combination of them both.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, and I want to talk about this because I think McCarthy's in real trouble. I defended McCarthy most of the season, but I said he has to beat Green Bay. If he can't beat Green Bay, that's a different conversation. Well, to get absolutely dominated by Green Bay and Jordan Love, now that's a different conversation from losing an overtime game on a bad officiating call. Now we have a different conversation. And I think he gets replaced. I think, and Dan Quinn, by the way, there went his job market outside of Seattle. That was a dubious effort. So, I mean, let's just talk about it. Does Jerry have to? I mean, Jerry's got to pay Dak. He loves Dak. He views Dak as some sort of elite quarterback and is willing to pay him. So let me ask you, how good of a job is it If the starting point is owner loves the quarterback, thinks he should be paid among the top 5, aren't you working uphill from that point forward?
I think it's a pretty good job because I think the guys, immediately, obviously, Belichick and their relationship has been, talked about a lot. I think Jim Harbaugh is going to have to get a call. Those guys have the juice and the power to say, look, we're not doing this. We're not giving this guy $50 million a year. Mike had to lie to get the job. And the other thing that was on full display today, Matt LaFleur has the most important quality you can have in the NFL. He has the ability to develop and make a quarterback into a star, right? Dak was already pretty good when he got there, right? Dak had success before Mike McCarthy. And one thing he has done is shit the bed now in 3 consecutive playoff games. 2 of them have been at home. I think it's worse. Like you said, last year they lose to the 49ers in a very tight game on the road. You hold your head high. It wasn't a bad loss. They have had 2 awful losses, though, in 2021 and this one at home. And that, to me, is unacceptable. I personally thought, coming into the game, Mike McCarthy, to keep his job, was going to have to win both home games, right? Because if he won this game, he'd have another home game. You can't be losing at home. If you lose on the road in the NFC Championship game where they hadn't been in 25 years, okay. But now I think all signs point to Belichick. And one thing's pretty clear is Belichick has his offensive coordinator available. We talk a lot about offensive and defensive coaches. Well, the reason to me, Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick, obviously Bill's resume speaks for itself, but what makes him truly powerful, Vrabel has Arthur Smith available, who he had a lot of success with. Belichick has Josh McDaniels available, who he has all the success with, and they can allow those guys to coach the offense. So I think, to me, you could argue Mike Vrabel if the Belichick and Arthur Smith makes sense as just, but there was a toughness lacking.
But again, I say, if Jerry believes Dak is it. I think we have.
How could he believe that now, Colin, after what he just witnessed? How could he?
Again, I have been on this for years. Dak is a good B+ quarterback. Jerry views him as an A. It's really interesting. This job is fascinating. It's not that Jerry runs a turnstile, but I'd almost rather Jerry be impatient than delusional on quarterback evaluation. Okay. Like, I'd rather a guy want me to get ratings in my job. I'm fine with a little pressure. What I'm not fine with is unrealistic expectations or forcing me to work with people aren't as good as you think. Dak's just not a top 10 level guy, and Jerry thinks he's a top 7 guy.
I understood some of the support before, even though I never agreed. Even the contract they gave him, I didn't view him as a $40 million guy. Right. But after today, to me, if he stands on that belief, he's entered Al Davis territory.
Yes.
To me, if he's able to pivot, which he's proven as a successful businessman over the years, and like you said, they do a pretty good job on personnel. There's a weird loyalty here. To me, he has to pivot off today's experience because he had a firsthand look. Jordan Love signed a 2-year, $11 million contract, and he looks like a combination. I think that's one of the greatest development jobs we've ever seen. Well, he looks like a flat-out superstar right now. He looks like Brett Favre meets Aaron Rodgers today.
Like, listen, the internet loves, this is what they love. They forget that new information, new opinion. Matt LaFleur was calling out Jordan Love in October press conferences.
So was the GM.
The GM and the coach were disappointed with him. Have you ever seen an in-season improvement for a quarterback? Not only is Jordan, think about this, he's cheaper than Aaron Rodgers. He's now more athletic than Aaron Rodgers. He throws the ball a lot like Aaron Rodgers. You get no drama like Aaron Rodgers. And generationally, he is completely copacetic with all these receivers and tight ends. Right now, Green Bay's young receiver tight end talent is the envy of virtually every team in the league. Like, it's hard to wrap your brain around this based on what we saw in October. Jordan Love is a significant, multifaceted upgrade from Aaron Rodgers, right? That's not debatable now.
Well, I think that you become a legend in the business of football by making moves like Ted Thompson once made, right? Brett Favre, you're gone. We're going with Aaron. Bill Walsh, we got to pivot to Steve Young. When you pivot off Aaron Rodgers, who had just previously won a couple MVPs, the coach and the GM are behind it. And then by the end of the season, into the playoffs, he looks like this. And as a GM, you have put around the youngest offense in the league. And these guys, Watson didn't even really do anything. Reed, up until the end of the game, hadn't done anything. It was Dobbs making all the plays, and he's really good. Think of the talent they have. We know how well they build offensive lines. I think these guys have immediately entered like Ron Wolf, Ted Thompson, we have stars running our operation. Because I think it was okay to question it early in the season, not because they made the wrong move getting rid of Aaron. It's like, well, it's really hard to replace that. It was rocky, and by the end of the season, the guy's a flat-out superstar, and so's the unit around him. So to me, it's Gutekunst and LaFleur. Like, this is why your argument on hiring offensive coaches, when you get the right one. Kyle Shanahan has owned the Cowboys the last 2 years in the playoffs. Why? Because he's comfortable playing against Dan Quinn. Matt LaFleur was also on that staff in Atlanta with Kyle. He was the quarterback coach. You saw today, he wasn't uncomfortable going up against that defense and that coordinator, and honestly embarrassed him worse than Kyle ever did the last 2 years. So to me, the stink's on Mike McCarthy. The stink's clearly on Dan Quinn, and all the positivity on the other side. It's hard. If they were a stock, they feel like Tesla or something 5 years ago. I mean, this is a team that you'd have to buy into because they've been so well run. This was always the pushback on Aaron Rodgers. Do you realize how well you have it in Green Bay? How well run this I get there's no owner. And then you go to the Jets, and this is the complete shit show.
Yeah, I mean, I said that before with Aaron. He never had a bad offensive line in 15 years in Green Bay. Favre didn't have many. The one thing, New England under Dante Scarnecchia and Green Bay for 15 years do a great job of drafting third, fourth, fifth, sixth round offensive linemen and developing them slowly into really good players. So, I mean, Green Bay is just, it's something we've hit on. 11 of the 14 coaches in the playoffs are offensive coaches. Now, you can, as a defensive coach, work if you have a star quarterback. Sean McDermott, D'Amico Ryans, it can work that way.
Yeah.
But there is no question when to develop a young quarterback, edge offensive coach, and if you have a disruption at quarterback, you're on a third or a fourth, Stefanski. Major advantage offensive coach. So, Mike Tomlin got into the playoffs, mostly because Joe Burrow got hurt and Cleveland lost 3 quarterbacks. I think they'll be extinguished very quickly. But I don't think I texted 2 GMs today. I'm on the phone with during the game texting, and they're saying the same thing: is Jordan Love. Matt LaFleur deserves a lot of credit for Jordan Love. And the other thing today that you noticed on that first drive, when Aaron Jones is running like that downhill, and that's Matt LaFleur, when he came to Green Bay, it was, I want to develop a run game that McCarthy had not developed a run game. I watched this Green Bay team. I'm not saying they're going to be the San Francisco or a Rams. They're a lot to defend because Matt can run it. Jordan can go off script. Nobody's got 2 to 3 good corners. This Green Bay offense, John, creates a lot of matchup issues.
Well, one thing I wrote down immediately is the advantage at the running back position in this game was evident early.
Yeah.
The gap between Aaron Jones and all the other guys they're running out. Pollard is a gadget player. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you have a young Ezekiel Elliott in his prime, right? And to me, when you have the running game like that and then all the explosive weapons, that's why guys were wide open all day long. The Dallas Cowboys had no clue what to do. But don't you think, you talk a lot about, and everyone does, about Belichick being a historian. Can you imagine breaking the record as the Cowboys coach? I know the Eastern Seaboard, he's comfortable. Atlanta's close to his new house in Jupiter, but Jerry can offer a lot of money. Obviously, Arthur Blank can too, but there's the Cowboy coach, Belichick, little revenge after just getting forced out by Robert, which he was clearly fired, right? I think all signs are going to point to Bill, because you're the coach newsbreaker now. A lot of people I know expect Harbaugh to be with the Chargers. That's where a lot of people in the league think he's going to go. So Belichick, people have already been, they said that before the game. Philly too. But now the Cowboys have a chance to have a head start because they could fire McCarthy first thing Monday morning, have Belichick on the horn, and get the ball rolling.
Here, there is certain things create clarity in life. Getting your ass kicked like that at home.
Sure.
It allows Jerry to go, wow, I can clean house. And it really does. It also, Jerry has to look himself in the mirror and sit down with Steven tonight at the house, at the ranch.
Yeah.
And they have to sit down and go, we got to do a clean break here of everybody. Dan, Mike, I don't know what they'll do with Dak. He may defend Dak, but I can see this being actually beneficial to Dallas, that Jerry Jones has to sit down. His scouts have to come to him and say, Jerry, we can have Dak, but you can't pay him $45-50 million. He's already made $20 million a year in endorsements being the Cowboy quarterback. We got to start drafting quarterbacks here. And it also, would it make Jerry, I mean, again, when you're a billionaire, can't relate, obviously, would Jerry acknowledge our way's not working? Like my way's not working, and give up some control?
I think it's easier after today. Like you said, I maybe they lose in overtime. Maybe you can justify it in your head, run it back, give them one more shot. But get embarrassed like that, have a game be over at halftime. This was obviously the number one pick in the wild card round, right? In terms of brands and television networks. I don't see how he survived. I don't see how he's not out by the morning. To me, it's clearly over. And you have the opportunity, right? Sometimes like getting the number one draft pick isn't ideal because if you need a quarterback, if it's not a great quarterback draft. This is an incredible head coaching opportunity with all these guys that have proven to be winners. And I do think the Belichick thing, a little bit like, almost a couple decades now with Bill Parcells, would just reinvigorate the fan base because they're going to be down and there's going to be a lot of negativity, and it's rightly deserved because the last 3 years they've been knocked out by Kyle twice and now LaFleur. So how are you beating those guys? And we know your guy's not as good as Sean McVay either. So it's like you got to deal with those. In the AFC, you got to deal with the quarterbacks. In the NFC, you got to deal with the star offensive coaches, all that came from Washington in 2012.
Listen to this, John. Coaches that had to move off talented quarterbacks. John Harbaugh, Flacco. He moved off him for Lamar. Been pretty beneficial. Andy Reid, Alex Smith was a Pro Bowler. McVay, Goff. Shanahan, Garoppolo. We've watched multiple coaches, and these guys were getting to Super Bowls. I mean, Flacco, 6 years removed from that, can still sling it. And those coaches took big swings. They moved off popular, playoff winning, or Super Bowl appearing quarterbacks. For a Lamar, for a Mahomes, for a Stafford, for a Brock Purdy, whoever it is. There is a recent history. Go back to Lamar. Is when you take that big swing and go, listen, we're just kind of stuck. I may have a slightly deteriorating product or a product with a ceiling. The teams that go for it, I mean, hey, Philadelphia, Carson Wentz, they moved off him. Jalen Hurts. I mean, Wentz that year he got hurt, he was leading in the MVP voting. So I mean, and I think, by the way, Miami's going to have this discussion.
Yeah.
I think Miami and Dallas have to go, you got to get over Pro Bowls really quickly. Those are bullshit awards that nobody buys into.
I think a big thing, too, for Jerry is, and this happened to Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll got fired, in my opinion, because they started looking around and going, he has no chance to beat McVay and Kyle Shanahan. Kyle beat him 5 straight times. McVay swept him this year. It wasn't even the macro. To me, it was the micro. We're getting lapped in our own division. So to me, if you're Jerry, you go, well, I've known Adam Peters for 15 years. I mean, look at his resume. For a non-GM, it's pretty incredible. Won Super Bowls multiple places. Now helped John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan build that thing. I think Washington's going to be well run. Even the owner has proven to be a good NBA owner.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Philadelphia Eagles will not hesitate to pull the trigger if they have to pivot, right? Yeah. So you have an owner that I don't exactly know the wealth between Lurie but he has enough money to do whatever he wants as well. And he will be aggressive. So to me, that has to inspire Jerry, knowing they play tomorrow night. Even if they win and then get knocked out next week, like the Eagles have no problem pivoting. So I think when you just look at the short-term view of your division, you go, we got to figure this out. And you also know that Arthur Blank and some of these other big money guys are sniffing around the top coaches. Why not rip the Band-Aid off? We already had a lot of question marks with McCarthy sometimes throughout the year. This is an all-timer. You just don't survive. They were a 7.5-point favorite. And it was the right move. I mean, they should have been a heavy favorite coming into this game. And to get beaten down, like, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but that feels like one of the more glaring games I remember watching in a long time in the playoffs.
Hey, listen, I wrote it down. Opening drive, run pass effectively, look too easy, couple dumb Dallas penalties. Then pick Jair Alexander. Dallas in trouble. That's first quarter, second quarter stuff. Like it felt like, we got big. And Dallas had 2 or 3 silly penalties early. You're like one and a
which has always been a problem for them.
Yeah, it's it's everything changes. It's just one of those things. I thought McCarthy was in the clear if he beat Green Bay. Even if he lost 28-27 on bad officiating, it was a Detroit-Dallas ending fiasco. When you're not prepared to play on either side, I mean, I'm trying to think of a, but it had Brandon
Staley vibes today. I mean, their defense, no clue what was going on. They were talking to CeeDee Lamb early in the game. Like, what's going on there?
By the way,
it was red flags everywhere.
Okay, that's a great point. I wrote that down in my notes too. Dak, CeeDee off. Kevin Burkhardt mentioned that. Greg Olsen mentioned that. So there was something really weird about that. And my takeaway was CeeDee was frustrated appropriately with Dak's ball placement, which, by the way, was terrible early in this game. Threw behind him on a corner route. So I think it was CeeDee was frustrated with just basically Dak's ball placement.
Well, that's another thing with Dak Prescott. When you look at the two quarterbacks right there, Jordan Love, who actually has been really accurate lately, can't afford to be a little inaccurate because he has such an explosive arm and now with their wide receivers can make big plays. When you're Dak Prescott in that group of, I would say Cousins has been there for a long time, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, Manning, and you don't have a huge arm, accuracy is what you have to hang your hat on. You have to be the most accurate guy on the field. So when you become, like, how did Alex Smith resurrect his career? It wasn't throwing bombs. It was having 70% completion percentage. Well, Dak's slinging it around like he's Jameis Winston, balls flying all over the place. You're like, you can't function. Even if their defense had played well today, they would have lost with that type of performance out of the quarterback. And the other thing is you cannot turn the ball over in the biggest games, right? You cannot. Pick sixes kill you. And Dak just now, remember last year at the end of the season, we're going to spend some time in March and May and April and go over all the picks. And what ended up being some of his downfall again, throwing the ball to the other team. It happened early in the season in the big hyped up game against the 49ers, turnovers, and it was ultimately their undoing again in this game. And I can't get over LaFleur, Gutekunst, the Packers. What a muscle flex as an organization. They feel like the Miami Heat or something right now. They just it's incredible how they pivoted.
All right, I want to talk 10 minutes. I want to give Miami, Kansas City some discussion on this. Hold on. Yeah, I want to give this some discussion because Tua has proven in warm weather with time to throw, he's a highly accurate thrower. But he has also proven that he's not very athletic. He's smaller than you'd like. He has an injury history. And unless the weather conditions are fairly ideal, he's limited. So unlike Dak, he is accurate. His ball placement's excellent. That's not the case with Dak. He is a pretty thrower. He's a little bit of Drew Brees. So I don't think you move off him now, but I think it does limit your extension ideas. So we know Kansas City's better. Most of us thought they'd win. I thought it was a shockingly bad effort by Miami in the second half. Obviously, the Cowboy loss was surprising, but Miami's offensive effort in the second half was really dubious. I mean, they were doing bubble screens late. They didn't want Tua to throw. So that tells you the staff is worried about protecting him. The staff is worried about his physical viability in games like that. What do you do with Tua? You're a former NFL scout. You have sources throughout the league. What do you do with him going forward?
I think they're in the worst spot you can be in football because they're almost stuck. But I almost think you have to pivot because this was his fourth year. So all the guys in his draft class, Herbert, Burrow, were paid after their third year, right? Because after your fourth year, you get the fifth year option, which for quarterbacks is essentially a franchise tag, 1.0, and then the real one comes. It's all guaranteed on the cap. So ideally you want to extend a guy. But there aren't, this isn't the NBA. You don't give out a mid-level exception to a quarterback, right? You either pay him the premium, which is well over $40 million a year and hundreds of millions of dollars, which in what world in the AFC could you pay Tua, let's even just say $150 million guaranteed, when the only way to compete in the playoffs is go on the road against Mahomes, who clearly was in a different universe, Lamar Jackson, who plays in frigid conditions, Joe Burrow, who while he doesn't have the big arm, has proven he excels in the cold, Ohio kid, and Josh Allen, who's been kicking your ass, thrives in the cold. Like, that's who you have to go through in that conference in cold conditions. And if Denver ever figures it out, also a cold place. So unless you're the number one seed, which they're not even remotely close to be, like, to me, 16-7 at halftime, that was not a normal 16-7 like in a dome because it was so cold. It was going to be hard to score. That score might as well have been 28-3. To me, the game was over at halftime. They threw one lollipop touchdown that Tyreek Hill had to come back toward and then ran around three guys. They didn't do anything else. So, like, listen, he's a solid player. and if he plays in a dome or in Miami, but that's not the AFC, because the AFC playoffs is at Buffalo, is at Kansas City. I mean, Buffalo is like an avalanche right now. Kansas City, it was the coldest game, one of them in NFL history. Yeah. And Patrick Mahomes, do you know what made him so remarkable? I don't even know what his box score was. He just played completely normal. Like they were throwing the ball down.
That's what I thought.
He just like played a normal Patrick Mahomes game. With Tua, he can't even function in that, which I understand. You've lived in the Northeast. I've lived in the Northeast. It's really cold. And when you're not used to it, it really throws you off. And they say it takes like 3 months to get acclimated. There's no way you get acclimated in 24 hours. And he physically, when you have a weak arm, like from a scouting perspective, it's very hard to pierce through the wind, and the cold slows down the ball. So Mahomes and Allen, the reason these guys can thrive, look at Peyton Manning back in his heyday. He struggled on the road in cold weather conditions, and he's remarkably better a couple years into his career than Tua. So I couldn't pay him. I couldn't do it. But I think we know how they'll just play it on the fifth-year option. If you extend them, you're basically just acknowledging we'll try to compete to win 10-plus games and then lose in the playoffs, because you're not going to win in the playoffs.
Yeah, Ethan Strauss was talking about this on a podcast where he said if you're somebody that struggles in cold weather, you want to be in the NFC. But in the AFC, even in your own division, just think about December, January games. Buffalo, New England, New York, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. I mean, it's like, and then again, Denver and Kansas City. So it's just one of those things where, again, if he played in the SEC, you're hidden or the Pac-12. And he did, and he thrived.
He's from Hawaii, went to Alabama, and he's now in Miami. I mean, he's lived an incredible warm climate life. And Ethan was right. San Francisco, number 1 seed. What's the game going to be there next week? 62 degrees. Dallas, number 2 seed. Dome. Detroit, dome. Tampa, warm weather place. Philly is one place where it can get kind of cold, but it's not that cold. I mean, Kansas City, that stretch in the Midwest to me, Kansas City, Chicago, Green Bay is as cold as it gets. And that's why I'd feel pretty good if I was Green Bay. I got another strong arm quarterback who's going to be able to play in that frigid condition if we ever get home games moving forward.
By the way, let's touch on Kansas City. So Brett Veach is one of the sharper GMs in the league. Andy Reid. I think there's a functionality and an intelligence from the Hunt family, Veach, Andy, Mahomes. They have a really good scouting department. Obviously, you can see with their late round picks. I think they're a great example, like Green Bay. Hey, we got a flaw. We're not good at receiver. Let's just develop it. So Rashee Rice feels like to me now, he's not a top 5 one, but he's a number 1 receiver. Thick, good after the catch, not a high-end one, not even a CD Lamb yet, but he's a low-end one. Travis Kelce, and then they have a bunch of 3s. They don't really have a 2. It's Watson. It's guys that you wouldn't trust as a 2, but they're 3s. So they have a hole. They're just not great at wide receiver. But as I watched them yesterday in their run game, as they pivot to the second stage of their dynasty, they're going to be more run-centric and they're going to be more defensive-centric, at least for another draft. I think there's 3 teams right now in the AFC, Buffalo, Baltimore, and Kansas City. They feel like they're a bit above the fray. And my takeaway is, I think Buffalo right now and Baltimore are better. But boy, there is something to be said about have the bag, have the ring. Do you give Kansas City an outside shot to win the AFC, or do you feel like it's just that receiving weakness? They can't play quite from behind.
I don't give them an outside shot. I give them a real shot, because the playoffs it doesn't usually look like Green Bay and Dallas, right? It's usually a pretty ugly game, especially in that conference like we talked about, because the weather is such a factor. It's like a different sport. Like that game in Kansas City has nothing in common in what we just witnessed in a controlled environment in Dallas. Nothing. I mean, it's -5 degrees. They know how to win. I mean, they have, championship medal, championship culture. Obviously, they have championship quarterback and coach, the 2 most important guys in the building. All their defensive guys, the young ones, were part of the team last year. Offensively, Pacheco, Kelce played huge roles last year. So now you just got to integrate the young player who shined last night, and they're used to playing in the weather. So next week in Buffalo, assuming Buffalo wins, which I think we all do, probably be freezing cold. Well, who's not going to be fazed by that? You saw Tua walking into the game last night. It looked like he was going on an Aspen vacation. Mahomes showed up in a windbreaker, right? I mean, they're just not. Mahomes wasn't wearing sleeves.
I know.
He's lived there for how long now? 6+ years. He's used to it. Andy's, mustache is frozen. Andy's been coaching in these games for 25 years. And before that, he was in Green Bay with Favre and Holmgren. They're comfortable in that environment. It all gets back to their competitive culture starting in training camp. They're still one of the last teams that practices hard. And that's where it shows. And listen, we can nitpick, and I know a lot of people do with Sean McDermott, but he's a defensive tough guy. John Harbaugh, defensive tough guy. The one problem for Miami is their head coach is an offensive guy. Now, they added Vic Fangio. To me, they had a lot of injuries. But like last night, to me, was a toughness clinic because everyone in the NFL is tough, right? Just like any Marine going to the Navy SEALs is going to be a tough guy. But there's a reason most guys don't make it. And there's a big difference between the toughest teams and that next tier. And you saw it last night. I didn't even think the game was close. Even 16-7, I'm like, Miami has no shot to win this game.
Yeah, Miami's tackling was really poor.
They look cold. They look cold. And I'll never forget when I got hired in Philly and it got to like November and December on the sideline pregame, you have so much respect for playing in these games. And I'm talking like 20 degrees where you can't feel your hands. It's really cold. Once you get to those level temperatures, remember the Seattle-Minnesota game years ago outside when Cam Chancellor claimed he had frostbite on his foot like 2 weeks later. The level of mental toughness and focus on top of the talent, it's really hard to focus. And to me, you just saw the Kansas City, like they dropped a couple big plays because their wide receivers, maybe the wind threw them off. They were open, and Mahomes, the ball wasn't even that far off. That game could have been honestly like 40-7. Couldn't it have been?
Yeah. I really was. I felt like Dallas's loss today, a lot of it was Jordan Love, and they're just, I'd said it on Friday. I thought I took Green Bay to cover. I said, listen, Dallas, nobody has 3 good corners in the NFL. I just think Green Bay has too many good people. And so some of that loss was Jordan Love looked like Aaron Rodgers. Not that Miami quit, but I thought it was one of the more discouraging efforts. Like the team was literally protecting Tua. I mean, Mike McCarthy wasn't protecting Dak today. Dak is limited. But I thought that was one of those where you fly back. I'm the owner, and I'm like, what do I have here? Like,
do you agree under no circumstances you can give him that $220 million contract?
I've always been. I'm just listen. I have a theory. It doesn't matter what business it is. You can pay big money, but you have to do it infrequently, and you really have to be sure it's right. It's got to be really glue people or stars. And I think. I don't blame the defensive effort because they were missing 6 starters, but that offensive effort in the second half, if I'm an owner, I'm like, oh, my coach doesn't trust my quarterback. The hell, I ain't going to pay him. I'm writing the checks. There's no way I'm paying him. So I think what you do if you're Miami, you don't cut Tua. What you do is you let him play out next year, and you draft another quarterback, maybe first, second, third. I think they have a lot of pieces. I really do. I think they can score a lot of points. I don't think they're a Super Bowl team, but I don't think there's a lot of needs. The offensive line needs some attention. They've got receivers, corners. They have edge rushers. They just all got hurt. So I don't feel like, I kind of feel like it's Denver. If they could get the quarterback right, Miami gets a star quarterback. You win a lot of games with those 2 offensive coaches.
Yeah, they definitely have the infrastructure with the coaches too, because defensively, they're with Vic Fangio, it's going to get better as they get better players. It was on full display these first 3 games, right? C.J. Stroud was in a different world than Joe Flacco, whose Disney movie came to a crashing halt, and then and obviously Mahomes versus Tua, and then today Love versus Dak. It really, really matters, and it's why the 49ers can manipulate it a little bit because their roster is so good. Right? It would have been hard for Brock Purdy in that situation on the road in Kansas City, right? When you don't have a great arm, but what their team is so good. So when your team's a little flawed and your quarterback is not elite, you can get exposed really quick if your team's a little off. And Cowboys, the Browns, the Browns have had an incredible season, but that was the Joe Flacco that we have seen the last 5 or 6 years. And the moment you get that type effort, you go home.
All right. Well, you could join me later for the Lions Detroit, but I don't want to get in the way of your Tito's night. I'm going to pour one right now and watch the Lions Rams. I can't.
How about your guy Jedd Fisch taking the Washington job?
Well,
you nailed the DeBoer story. We got Adam Schefter here.
Well, yeah, that one I was told Wednesday that people think he was the second, third, or fourth choice. He wasn't, because Saban almost hired the OC from Washington the previous year. So Saban had his eye, and Greg Byrne had their eye on Kalen DeBoer. They called Sark on that. It was out of respect for Sark, but they knew Sark wasn't coming. Sark loves Texas. Austin's a better place to live than Tuscaloosa. Sark's got it rolling. The boosters love him. So a perfunctory call, but Kalen DeBoer was like their first legitimate guy. So this idea he was second, I was told Wednesday, like they're going after Kalen DeBoer. Jedd Fisch was interesting. Lance Leopold at Kansas, they were really interested. Apparently had, I think, a phoner or a Zoom and blew everybody's socks off. But Jedd Fisch and Lance Leopold, and then it came down to Jedd. Jedd will be able to assemble an offensive unit very quickly, and that's a big part of it. Washington has lost most of their offense, transfer portal. They've got a decent NIL collective, but not huge. So Jedd Fisch can keep them afloat very quickly. I mean, I would say the offense for Arizona is better today than Washington, so he's going to have to rebuild it. But Washington, I think we both agree, is a better job. There's more money in the athletic department. Yeah,
you go into the Big Ten. I mean, there's going to get 3 or 4 teams every year in the 12-team playoff. The Big 12 is going to get one.
Yes.
They're going to be a one-bid league. The other thing is Jedd, the guys, he was going to have a top 15 team coming back. Those guys can transfer if they want to go join him. So some of his talent can follow him there. To me, how about Alabama? They tried to get Ryan Grubb last year to be Saban's OC. Now they get Ryan Grubb and DeBoer with Saban retiring. So what a coup for Alabama. Now the cultural fit, my theory has often been where you're from really matters.
Yeah.
Kirby, Jimbo, Dabo, think the guys that, Nick's from West Virginia, the Northeast guys, obviously the West Coast guys. But there are outliers. As someone in the league told me, winners win, and Urban was a good example. He'll win no matter what, and DeBoer might be that. And his resume would say he's going to win no matter where he's coaching.
Yeah, I think he'll win. And he's not a great recruiter. And so I think he feels like the South and the brand. Washington's hard to recruit to. There's not a lot of players. Oregon, Idaho, Washington, Montana, Alaska. There's maybe 8 high-end Division I players in all those states combined. So I think the feeling is DeBoer is like, this brand sells. The state's got 30 Division I players. The region has 200. And so, and because
roster is loaded.
So I think DeBoer looks at this and thinks, it's just an easier place to recruit. And by the way, with the NIL transfer portal, recruiting is now a pain in the butt. It's more difficult than ever. So Alabama is one of those 4 or 5 jobs. Even bad USC and Texas teams usually have players. Oklahoma always has. Ohio State always has players. All right, good stuff. John, as always, money. Stay near your phone. We'll see what happens in the Rams and Lions, buddy.
Okay, see you.